talk about the prospect's journey and the concept of conversational storytelling to accelerate your sales velocity. With me today, I've got Mary Lou Tyler, Nigel Green, and Stephanie Grossman. So delighted to have you on the call today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with some introductions because we have a lot of experience on the call. Mary Lou, where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, beautiful Des Moines, Iowa, where it's about 40 some odd degrees right now, getting towards winter.
Fantastic. So you're here to warm up the room, if you will, but you've done so much with your career. You're a founder of Strategic Pipeline, a Fortune 1000 outbound sales process improvement consulting group. You've authored two very amazing books, most recently Predictable Prospecting. And within that book, you call out a very specific way of writing email, which you refer to as the compel with content framework. That's
Right.
something that I'd like to kind of draw on a little bit later in the conversation. But first, tell us the inspiration for that framework and predictable prospecting in general.
Well, the framework itself was really born out of the frustration we all have experienced when we get emails from colleagues, peers, vendors that fall flat, add no value to our day, are simply feeling slimy, spammy in nature. I wanted to develop a very simple structure that we, as non-writing salespeople, non-writers, could follow to address three big questions. Why should people change? Why now? And why us? So the crafting those visual stories, but one pain point at a time within the body of an email or for a sales conversation that we're going to have. So that's how that started, was to try to get the current closed-mindedness of our readers into an open and ready to talk to us state. Predictable prospecting was the same thing. Frustration in how we can move people swiftly yet authentically from initial conversation through to the qualified opportunity, and do it with a framework and a process that's repeatable, reproducible, consistent, so that we can scale if we want to.
Absolutely. So you're going to give us some techniques a little bit later about how to actually break this down and weave a story into the email and broader outbound prospecting process.
Exactly.
Fantastic. I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into that. First, we're going to talk to Nigel Green. He is the founder of Evergreen, a consultancy for sales and marketing, and you've assumed leadership roles at very fast-growing companies, and most recently you've been with StoryBrand as the CEO. We know that stories are really compelling, but often difficult to craft. Nigel, what have you learned working with sales teams to develop their stories?
Well, we've learned that we've all been lied to as selling professionals. We've been told during our sales training that people tend to buy the best product. So we start talking about our products and we start giving them bits of information that aren't really relevant. The truth is, people buy the product or service that they can understand the fastest. And what we know now is that story is the fastest way to move a prospect from unaware to a user.
Thank you so much. And Nigel, where are you dialing in from?
So I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, the home of healthcare in the United States.
Wow.
Fantastic. It's a beautiful city. I've been there once.
Good town.
Stephanie, good morning. I know you're at Prezi headquarters. Where are you dialing in from?
I am calling in from our San Francisco office, downtown San Francisco.
You're director of marketing and brand. You're responsible for all aspects of the brand strategy and positioning. And prior to your current role, you worked at Pop Chips, Revlon, and Danone, leading customer-specific marketing strategies to drive growth and revenue. Recently, Prezi produced a survey. It's the State of Attention report. I'm curious, what drove the creation of that survey? What are some of the outcomes you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So what drove the survey was actually Microsoft did a survey study a couple years ago that came out that said your attention span was just 8 seconds, which was actually less than a goldfish. And and we saw that and thought, we didn't buy it. And yes, we all multitask and we all look at our phones, and it sometimes feels, but also I don't know about you, but I'm sure I've watched movies, I've watched TED Talks, I've watched Netflix for many hours at a time, for much more than 8 seconds. So we did a survey to see, what is the attention span? And what we found was that your attention span is far longer than 8 seconds. Business professionals, more than not, are saying they have a longer attention span now than they did a year ago. But it has to have, it's selective, you're picky. And so, while, to get your attention to be more than 8 seconds, you need story, you need dialogue, you need visuals, you need all the things that Nigel, Mary Lou, and you are talking about.
Absolutely. I think that now we have to raise the bar in terms of how we deliver content and how we exchange ideas, not just talk at people. So I'd also like to introduce our moderators in the chat bar. We have Arwen Heredia. She's the content marketing manager at Prezi, and Jeremy Boudinot with Boudinot Media. They're going to be answering some questions and sharing some links as we go through this Prezi, which I'd like to introduce to our audience, essentially the framework for the prospect's journey. Arwen, before we go into this journey, would you mind sharing the first polling question for our audience? We'd like to know what's missing from your business story that would make it more compelling. We know that stories are hard. I'd just like to get a couple of answers here to kind of see if it's lacking vision, lacking clarity. Maybe it just doesn't have the impact and value that your business audience needs, because we know that a business story is significantly different than, say, a novel or a movie. Mary Lou, tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing with this framework to be a little bit more creative with the email copy. And in just a second, we're going to dive into that awareness topic, which is really where we first, as buyers, start to learn about new products and services.
Right. As I mentioned, our work is really trying to get a system in place so that we can keep it simple, keep it impactful, high impact with least amount of effort, because we're working with a lot of records at top of funnel. So the Compel with Content framework, or a story framework, is consistent with 5 different pieces of information that we collect. We also need to know at top of funnel what level of awareness our folks are in, because crafting the right message begins with understanding where that buyer is in his purchase intent. So we have a lot of different levers, a lot of different levels, and a lot of different states of mind that we're working with in order to build a very impactful business conversation that compels somebody to want to advance with us in the pipeline. And we'll talk a little bit about how we go about doing that when we get to the awareness section of this presentation.
Absolutely. You talked about states of mind and building awareness. I think it's really important to hone in on the building, if you will. So many emails are kind of driven into a transactional mode, and I think there's a lot of quality with story to develop that awareness. Let's see what's lacking in people's business story. Lack of clarity. Okay, I would agree with that. Little or no business impact. So we need clarity and we need impact. Thank you, Arwen. Could we drive into that awareness bubble and see what we can do top of funnel to provide clarity and impact? So I just want to orient folks. There's a topic and some side topics which we'll talk about. Mary Lou, as a prospector, we're trying to do a couple of things. And the prospector has a state of mind, which I call out below. They're looking for something specific, relevant, timely. How do you start to approach engaging with somebody to get them to pay attention?
Well, the first thing we do is we recognize where they are relative position in the pipeline. Are they a cold prospect? Because we're still, in some cases, reaching out to people we don't know with whom to start conversation. So we're bumping into them at this state of, who are you and why should I care? I have no idea what you're talking about. We have that level to deal with. Then we also have to work with people who are coming into us that we attract through those inbound channels. Theoretically, they should know about us or know a little bit about the problem that they might have. Having to juggle those different levels, we've come up with a very simple system to look at 5 different levels of awareness and figure out the content and story within those levels that resonates the best. It really is, if we wanted to take a white paper, for example, we would flip it on its side and we would take the relevant obstacles, challenges, nuisances, the things that are driving our prospects crazy in trying to get their activity or job or task completed successfully on time with quality. We put those in a column. We call that obstacles. Then we look at that white paper and look at potential outcomes. What could they achieve? Where can they get? if they were to solve this problem that they know that they're having, or they're thinking now, wow, that is a problem that I do have. We put that in a column. We then look back to that white paper, get those specific proof points that would allow a prospect to say, okay, they got me, they got my attention, I'm interested, but prove that you can do this. So we are now getting them to, why should I do this now? What's that sense of urgency? Put that in a column, and you have the opportunity that lies ahead. So now we've taken one white paper, we've created columns for their obstacles, the outcomes, we contrast that, we show the proof, we give them the opportunity, and we have now the content for at least 8 emails that we can write, 1 pain point per email, and we have a trigger that says, okay guys, there's something that's bugging you. I'm going to use that one word or those 2 phrases that would get you to jolt up, just stare into your computer and realize, wow, they're talking about me. Maybe I should move my eyeballs now to that next paragraph to see what this is all about. And at the end, we close it up with a simple call to action, which could be, hey, here's a white paper. If you want to know more, read this. Or here's an infographic. Or here's a should ask questions document that will help you along that journey to see how important this really is for you to start resolving.
And I know you're a very creative person. You take a creative approach to teasing out some of these story elements. You talked about interviewing people to get them away from the sort of, writing on a blank sheet of paper. What does that process look like? Who are you interviewing, and what kind of questions are you asking?
Well, salespeople are notorious for saying, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to write. I can't do these emails. But they will all recognize that they're the masters of the sales conversation. So all I do simply is say, look, let's have this conversation as if you're belly to belly with your prospect. How would you open the conversation? How would you describe the pain they're experiencing? How would you contrast that to a potential outcome of how life could be? Let me hear you talk that conversation. So we record them on their phone, we listen to them, go through that pain, then come up to the outcome, and then show the reason why they should make this change now and why their company is uniquely positioned for that. We are recording that conversation. We transcribe it, and now instead of having a blank piece of paper, we have the beginning of a beautiful story-like conversational email that we can edit and send out. And I'll tell you that we've done tests with salespeople talking the conversation versus a writer writing the conversation from marketing or other resources. The sales conversation always outperforms in terms of conversion rates that marketing email.
You've given us a very specific technique, and I love that. It's very actionable. It's something we can do today.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads us to our next question about what type of story. You'll notice on the right, I've used a little bit of jargon. There's the most annual revenue or recurring revenue story. Mm-hmm. There's the best outcome story, which you referenced. And then there's what we call the ideal account profile or ideal client profile fit. And so I want to just add those story types to our audience to let them know that there's different ways of casting this vision, if you will, and moving our buyer to the next stage, that conversation stage. Arwen, if you wouldn't mind going back to the overview and moving us into the sales story, we'll actually talk about that conversation. Nigel, how are you doing?
Good. I was taking notes on Mary Lou. We've known her for a while. Still find little nuggets to write down.
Absolutely. And Mary Lou, this is a round table. Stephanie, we want to include you as well, but let's just say that you're on the phone with a prospect who said, yes, I'd like 30 minutes. What do we do besides data dump? How can we actually provide that clarity and that impact? Because maybe they're in a cautious state of mind. Nigel, what do you recommend when you're working with sales leaders to kind of give a face and a place to the problem that you're trying to solve?
Well, so it's a common problem, this lack of clarity. Everyone faces it, and they don't have a solution for it. So the first thing that you're going to do when you get on a prospect is they're going to ask you, well, what do you do? Tell me about your business. Tell me about your company. And we tend to say things like, well, our grandfather started this, or we won this award. And that doesn't help them. So what we want to do is we want to talk about the problem that our customer has. So that's the first thing. I'm going to give you a 3-part framework to just kind of open it up with your customer and put the ball in their court for them to get vulnerable and share with you that problem that Mary Lou's trying to get from them in that email. So we want to say it's 3 parts. You got to understand, what is the problem? What is your solution? And what's the reward for the customer? Okay, so I'll give you some examples that we've worked with in the past. You might think, well, these are going to be very generic. I'm going to talk about a pet store, for example. Well, pet owners are concerned about what their pets are really eating. That's a problem. Anyone that has a pet, you're concerned about that. Mm-hmm. So we source our food from local vendors, which ensures your pets stay happy and healthy. So that's the solution. We use local vendors, and it ensures that your pet stays happy and healthy. I'm going to give you one that I really like to use, and I've created this for financial advisors, but it works really well for anybody that's in the data space. Most people can't get their heads around their financial future. That's the problem. Every customer, anybody that has money can say, yep, that's me. So we created a financial map that puts all your info on a weekly dashboard. That's the solution, giving you peace of mind about your finances. That's the reward. So anybody here that's in this prospecting game or has to have those introductory conversations need to understand how to talk about your business in that 3-way: problem, solution, and what's the success. Because what that does, and we're talking about story here. I just gave you 3 stories, or 2 stories. One, I gave you one about a pet store, and then one about a financial, about all of us and how we relate with the financial advisor. And I say I gave you 3rd because I'm going to give you one more.
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
I want to jump in, Nigel, and I want to pivot just a little bit to this concept of face, place, and problem. Sure. Stephanie, you know how important it is to make the customer the hero.
Yes.
How do we do that? By really honing in on who that hero is and giving them a setting that the prospect can relate to.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, to Nigel's point, you want to come in and have a conversation. And a great way to spark that conversation is to start telling a story and see your prospect's reaction. So, if you're saying, hey, I work with a client in a different client, let me tell you their story. And they might, and you describe this, here's an example. I'll talk about a Prezi customer. This is Chris Bennett. He sells concrete, and his concrete is longer lasting than the others. And so let me tell you a little bit about his story. And he talks about how there's concrete from ancient Roman buildings that are still around today, yet there's bridges that were built 30 years ago, and they are falling down. And he goes into why he cares so much about sustainability, going back to his own personal story. And if I'm talking to a prospect in the insurance industry and I'm telling them about concrete, they're like, that's similar to us because we're in a industry that also has a lot of competition that's very similar, and I need to stand out the way that Chris does. And then I start hearing their story. And so I think by starting to tell a story, giving a context of a customer, giving a context of yourself, giving your brand story, you're opening it up. You're not trying to tell a story the way a movie does, where the participant just passively listens, but you're hoping it will spark a conversation with them so you can hear their story and then offer up a more custom solution for them.
One of the things that story does is it helps us to relate, and that's called a neural coupling. Mary Lou, how important is it to relate to a real person in the story? How do we cast that character beyond their title, their company, and say just some generic role?
Well, you've heard the term, we need to get in the shoes of our prospect. And it truly is spending time up front in the planning session, understanding who these people are, but more importantly, what are their daily activities? What are the things? There's 3 things that they're trying to do: trying to get a job done, trying to start a job, and trying to get the job done with quality. And if they're frustrated or suffering in any of those 3 areas, we really need to get an understanding of exactly what it is that's causing the frustration. But also, there are challenges, but there are also gains. Can we help them do the job faster? Can we help them do it with more quality, with less time? Digging into the day in the life of the prospect as if you are them helps you understand where to focus your energy when you are describing this challenge, this nuisance, whatever it is that's going to pique their interest. Another thing is, we're so guilty of making prospects work for figuring out what their own problem is. And that's just not fair. Story allows us to open up their mind as to the problem, but we're just feeding them the problem itself, and they're expanding on it with their imagination as we walk them through the story.
Absolutely.
I've seen so many emails that point to a white paper, don't even bother to summarize what's in it for me. Very simple.
Yeah, we have an opportunity now with video to be a lot more expressive. And Nigel, you talked about kind of painting the picture of the place, the pet store. I get it. Like, I see real people in there. And then finally, we need to articulate the problem. But Nigel, I want to ask you, how do we articulate the backstory, which is the problem that the prospect had before he or she encountered you? Because that's where your prospect is today.
Yeah, and it goes to, Mary Lou does a great job of explaining this paradigm of from unaware to aware to interested. And once we're meeting with prospects, they're interested because of two things: how this problem makes them feel, and then the second thing is why that's an injustice in the world, why it's just not right.
Yeah.
And so when we want to talk about the problem and the backstory, they're anchored by this. Makes me feel uncomfortable. This makes me feel insecure. And maybe if I work with this company, it'll fix my problem and I won't feel that way anymore. Or this will make everything right in the world. And so that's where we have to drill down. Nobody buys anything because of the problem. They buy it because why it's wrong in the world or how it makes them feel vulnerable or insecure or some negative emotion. And that's the backstory we're trying to get to.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask Arwen to move us to the overview and to move into this kind of the sales insights phase. And we're going to also address a question from Sai about the 3 biggest mistakes you see people making in their sales story. I think we can all weigh in on this. But first, I'd like Stephanie to talk about the kinds of insights that you gain when you facilitate a conversation relative to priorities and decision makers and KPIs, because that's what defines a business story. Go ahead.
Yep, and I think especially by the time you're in a sales situation where you're talking, you have a meeting or a phone call with a prospect, because hopefully your team has done a good job nurturing them to get to that point, they've already learned a ton about your business. They've learned a ton about the product. They've received awesome emails from Mary Lou. They've gone on your website. They might have read some ebooks and white papers. So they know a lot about you. And then the worst thing that you can come in and do is start presenting to them and talking to them, repeating the information that they already know. What you want to do is go in and figure out they're coming to that meeting for a reason, is that they're interested and they're aware and they're interested to learn more to make a decision. And so you want to come in and know, what don't you know that you need to know to make that decision? And that's when having that conversation, asking them where they are, what do they want to know, what do you want to focus on? Don't assume that you need to start from the whole, let me tell you about us, we were founded. They've seen that on your website months ago.
Right.
Exactly. The buyer is in a particular state and they need to convert. Some people talk about a spark line, that sort of transformation. Mary Lou, you've probably seen this in bake-offs. That's the most difficult time for vendors. Typically it ends in no decision. How does a spark line help move the deal forward?
What we're really looking at is, what are those compelling events? What are those factors that will differentiate you from the plethora of other things going on, first of all, in their life, and then eventually as we move further into the funnel, we're talking about the competitors and how do we differentiate ourselves there. So this is really a nice way to explode the Me Too-ism of the story and make it unique, make it different, make it authentic, make it you, because we still do buy from people at the end of the day. And as Nigel said, there's a comfort making a decision when you trust the decision, when you've been through an experience that allows you to say, you know what, I am going to go with these people. Sure, they may not have all the bells and whistles I'm looking for, or there may be a little bit of a success path we go through, but I trust that they're going to get me there.
Absolutely. And to Sai's question, to not include the emotional human connection, I think is a big fail. Nigel, how does that help us, that emotional bond with the executive buy-in? Because we know there's more than one decision maker.
So one of the things that that kind of leads to that emotional connection, and Stephanie was talking about this, and this gets to Sai's question. One of the problems that I see pervasive in selling to a team is that we try to assert a problem for them. We come in and tell them what their problem is, and so the best way to connect with someone is to have something in common and share. And so if we can go into that conversation recognizing that they're the expert of their own problem, and any problem that I could give them is not going to be anywhere as compelling as a problem they already have. And so if I can get everybody united around a problem that's unique to them, that they're the experts of, that's when it's emotional, and that gets down to really why people buy, because we're talking about how it makes them feel.
Fantastic. I love this. And I'd like to kind of anchor this piece with a technique from Stephanie, which is basically, how do you encourage talking with your audience versus talking at your audience?
Yeah. And we call it conversational storytelling. And we do it a lot with Prezi. You can see here, you're putting your content out on one place so you can move around. And you basically want to use visuals to reinforce what you're saying. So as you tell your story, the worst thing you can do, which unfortunately happens way too much in meetings, is start reading bullet points off a slide. Because not only are you just giving a monologue to your audience, it's not a conversation. It's also really hard. You can't read bullet points and listen at the same time. It's like trying to listen to a podcast and read a book. It's just really hard for your mind. And so you lose people, and that's when they tune out. But instead, if you have visuals and you start talking to a story and engaging with the audience, asking them, questions, seeing what they're interested in, you can move along to the part of the story or a different story that is resonating with them. And that's what we call conversational storytelling. It isn't a story in the way you're talking at them. It's a dialogue, just like you would. And everybody can do this, because we do this all the time in our personal lives. We come home and with friends and partners, we have conversations and we tell stories. And so it's something that is innately, it's natural to who we are. And so everyone can do it. And everyone, it's actually more natural than not. And
I think we just need a storytelling mindset at work, because we know it exists on the weekends and at home.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Arwen to take us to the overview. Before we go into an actual Prezi story, I want to introduce executive buy-in kind of as a round table here. We know that you might have a champion inside your prospect organization who would love to, cut the check, but there's 3 or 4 other folks on the end of that conversation, and they're managing multiple layers of risk and reward, and ultimately investors are looking for velocity. You got a few minutes to walk down the hall to your VP or CEO, and they want to know 3 things: that you are reliable, you're trusted, and you're proven. How can story help your brand champion to convey your message inside their own organization? Mary Lou, go ahead.
I think the most important thing we can look at is where others, colleagues, peers, anyone who's gone through this journey, if we can tell their story of what it was like, not only at the end of the rainbow, but along the path of success, of how they were able to start from a place where things were not good, but consistently move towards the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Those are compelling stories, because if the CEO or the C-suite doesn't believe that he has the bandwidth to get from A to Z, but can probably go from A to C, and if he hears a successful A to C story, he's more likely to feel comfortable that this is the right solution for his company.
Absolutely. The story is a journey. It's not kind of a, magic pill that we take. We have to show them the success path. Nigel, help us talk about velocity with regards to story. How can story change people's mind faster than charts and graphs and facts and figures?
Well, we know that, and Stephanie talked about this earlier, that Stephanie, you said that, story, this whole notion of an attention span of 8 seconds is baloney. If that were the case, we wouldn't all go to the movies and sit there for 90 minutes and not look at our phone. So story is the best way to do it. There's an element in every good story called the plan. And if you can litter this into your testimonials, it creates velocity in your deal. The most simplest plan we all know is stop, drop, and roll. That's the plan if there's a fire, and we remember it. But when we can show kids what is a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to get me from here to there through our testimonials, and have our past customers give that plan to them, deals move quickly. So don't listen to my plan. Let me tell you what we were able to do with this customer. Here's their 4-step plan to getting from here to there. Deals move fast.
Absolutely. It speaks to Mary Lou's point. Stephanie, we're going to have you share a customer Prezi, which is very powerful. It does show that spark line, that tension, and the plan. Before we do that, though, I'd like Arwen to just throw up our second audience poll. What aspects can quickly help you enhance your business story? Because we want to really drive some takeaways here. And while we do that, Stephanie, just tell us a little bit more about your customer and the kind of Prezi that you're about to share, a little bit of their backstory, even what they were doing before they started using Prezi.
Yep, and so our customer is a Prezi customer of ours named Chris Bennett, and he works in concrete, which, you know, if you say you can't make a story in your industry, Chris Bennett is telling awesome stories in the concrete industry. So I think it shows that, you don't have to be in the entertainment industry to tell great stories. And, and Chris actually won a project redoing the Liberty Park, which is the base of the Statue of Liberty. So you can imagine how competitive that bid must have been, given it's such an iconic symbol of our country. And he won it through story. And so I'm not going to share you a presentation that Chris actually gave last week at a concrete conference. It's not the pitch itself, which is something that is more private to him, but it tells the same story. So, I'll show you how he uses visuals and he creates emotion to tell the story of concrete. And when you're ready, I can share if you are.
Yeah, let's just review the audience poll. Thank you, Stephanie. There's a number of elements that are missing, visual imagery being the first, but then the talking points, the structure, and the clear business impact and outcomes. I think those are the qualifiers. As you said, Stephanie, a business story is supposed to demonstrate change.
Yes. You want to, and visuals are an excellent way to show that before and after of what that change can be. So I think, all these things, a visual imagery can be such a powerful way to show change that will complement whatever you're saying. And then having that structure to your story is critical. I think Nigel and Mary Lou both mentioned having the structure and getting through the story is important. Having the right tensions and emotions to keep it going is also very, very interesting. So I'm going to share with you, I think, an example of Chris's presentation, and you'll see he uses a lot of these things right now. I'm going to.
Fantastic. We look forward to seeing this real Prezi in action because it changes the narrative.
And can you guys see my Prezi?
Yes.
Arwen, can you close the poll? Perfect.
Okay. So you can see my Prezi?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is Chris's Prezi about changing the language of concrete, and you can see it uses the story really demonstrates a lot of the things that we're talking about today. You can see in the visual overview, he contrasts the modern office building to an ancient structure from concrete. And even the way he's designed his presentation is a narrative, Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I'm just going to show a couple examples of Act 1, and I'm talking about how he talks. And he goes into his presentation about starting out with like ancient Roman concrete and showing, cracks and problems. And with the concrete industry, the villain is actually the weather, because it can destroy concrete, it can put cracks and make it fall apart. And so he talks about how a lot of recent construction from just as early as 30 years ago in very critical things like bridges are falling apart. And this is an example of a bridge in Minneapolis that actually fell apart. And he's like, and it doesn't have to be that way. He shows a contrast of this ancient building that is still standing today. And then he goes on in his story about, the details of concrete. But what he does a great job of is he's imbuing this very high emotion from the visuals, from contrasting this decaying bridge to this ancient building and saying it doesn't have to be this way. And he also tells a personal story about why he's attracted to this. And he talks about when he was a child, he would go on hikes with his father, and his father's lesson was to leave the trail better off than he found it. And that's why he wants to have his concrete be sustainable. He wants to leave it off better than before. And so he's able to tell a really powerful story. He's able to tell a really powerful story this way through these visual examples. And it has been very effective for him. And Prezi has enabled him to do it using our platform, which allows us conversational storytelling. And it allowed him to bring his story to life with visuals and with that flexibility where he can have a conversation instead of just have a monologue. And I think that for the executive buy-in, as going back to the main presentation, I think sharing those stories to Nigel's and Marilou's point, when you're able to tell those customer stories, where it's a lot easier to remember and it's a lot easier to give that trust and reliability and credibility than just throwing the facts and figures at them. You can easily go in and say, oh, this concrete is much more, has this chemical that makes it much more sustainable, but having the story behind it is what people will remember.
And I think that analogy that he used of leaving the trail where he was hiking with his father better than when he left it, that really resonates. I mean, there's a sense of loyalty, there's a sense of commitment that's built into that story, but it's for concrete. So you come away with that there's a true alliance between sustainability and wanting the earth to be better off than when he started with it, which is very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. He's able to use story to really drive that emotion and that power. And then, you can go into the details of, well, the reason this concrete is more sustainable and lasts longer is X, Y, Z with the different chemistry of it or whatnot. But if he started with that, it would not have the same impact.
Mm-hmm.
Hi guys, this is actually Arwen Heredia. I'm the content marketing manager that's been hiding in the background. It looks like we may have lost connection with Chris, so I'm going to go ahead and take over. But we actually are at the end of today's session, so thank you guys so much for joining us today. Everything that you said is spot on and I think is incredibly helpful for anybody who has considered storytelling, but specifically for people who haven't. I think we have a lot of people out in the world who think still, and especially according to that poll we just ran, that aren't quite convinced that storytelling has the business impact that it really does. But we have a lot of resources for our attendees today, so I want to make sure that you guys get access to that. It'll include a bunch of different things, but including that state of attention report that Stephanie mentioned, where we can see, scientific evidence that storytelling is really the thing to be doing in the future to really solidify your business and its corner in the market, and also to make sure that you're catering to the attention spans and the needs of the people who are taking over the workforce. So we will make sure that everybody that attended today gets access to those wonderful resources, as well as some information about the next panel PreziCast that we're going to be doing down the road here. So once again, thank you so much to Nigel and Marilou for joining us, and of course Stephanie, my boss and my mentor here at Prezi, always has wonderful things to say. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.